Welcome to the Contract Teardown Show from Law Insider, where legal experts tear down contracts from some of the most well-known companies and high-profile executives around the world.
In this episode, attorney Amber Petrig explains the intellectual property implications from changes to Spotify's terms of use. So, let's tear it down. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Contract Teardown Show from Law Insider. I'm Mike Whalen, here with my friend Amber Petrig. How are you today, Amber?
Doing great, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm good. We are going into the creator economy. I feel like I've done a lot of episodes about this recently. There's a lot of changes in sort of how independent creators are gaming systems. Obviously, the age of AI is creating all kinds of new games that are happening, and these companies are trying to solve it. I'm going to share a document with the people at home. I want you to tell me what it is. This is the Spotify Terms of Use. What is this document, Amber? When are we going to see this kind of thing?
Yeah, so this is the general terms of use for anybody that uses Spotify at all. I personally do subscribe to Spotify, wherever my opinions are on the company aside. This is a very common streaming platform. It's one of the streaming platforms that has become a household name. The viewers may notice that this is a UK agreement, but this is the publicly posted user agreement by Spotify, and it is pretty much duplicated across the platform, just translated into whatever local language. So this is going to cover your rights to listen to the Spotify catalogs. It's also going to cover your rights to post to Spotify. And generally any use that you're going to get out of Spotify, whether that be integrated with another system, at home, for business, all of this comes under this user agreement.
Perfect. And I mean, presumably the U.S. has been so far behind Europe on a lot of these privacy issues and usage issues and IP issues that the UK one is probably better than it. Though I did hear last week that there is a bill being put forth for a standard privacy doctrine in the United States, like rules for the road. All right, well, we're going to dig into this thing. And this is a bit of a weird situation in the sense, for our previous episodes, in the sense that I'm going to lay out kind of context with a couple of the clauses in this document. And then we're going to read from another document where Spotify is proposing changes to the way that they do things. Proposing is probably not the word, given that they have unilateral power. But we're going to talk about those changes. But let's set the stage a little bit. I'm going to go to Section 4 in these terms of use. It is content and intellectual property rights. Up at the top, it's got, about posting. If you post it, we can use it. It says you're solely responsible for the content you post. We can watch it and make sure you're not breaking rules and then deal with you. But then under licenses, it talks about user content. It says you retain ownership of your user content when you post it to the service. However, in order for us to make your content available on Spotify, we do need a limited license from you to that user content. There's other stuff about feedback and devices and experiences and infringement claims. But broadly, this is giving a limited license to go use it, to reproduce, to make available, to perform and display. What do you think about the language in this limited sort of license?
Yeah,
how do you like this sort of
I
use
feel
of this?
like limited is an interesting term to use here because this is very broad
Right.
as far as IP is concerned. So yeah, we are retaining ownership, but that bundle of rights that Spotify is grabbing, it's pretty widely phrased. So in this language, Spotify basically lays out this idea of we can stream your music wherever we're using Spotify globally. Heck, if we wanted to shoot out to the International Space Station, I don't know if they have access to Spotify, but if they did, it could be used there as well. And this idea is that they don't have to pay additional royalties for that kind of reproduction and that use, whatever border they're crossing. So that is not something that you would see outside of streaming like this. In streaming, however, this has become more and more common to keep this broad because that's the only way to really make streaming profitable, right? You can't say, I'm going to pay you every time I replicate this and then have it replicated every time someone opens a computer or an app on their phone, right? That's not tenable, that's not feasible. And paying out to that effect, I can see why Spotify would want this very wide. I can see why an artist might want to curb this a little bit, especially in Spotify's ability to use their their IP outside of just basic distribution and reproduction. But whether or not an artist and Spotify are going to really have time to negotiate on that is kind of a non-starter, right? We've got a very large corporation, and even some of the biggest artists out there that can put pressure on Spotify don't typically have that kind of power. It's, do you use it or do you not?
Speaking of, they have all the control. Let's go down to 7. 7 says about these terms. Yeah, so it's talking about the document overall. And it says, under applicable law, you may have certain rights that can't be limited by a contract. These terms are in no way intended to restrict those rights. Smart, especially if you're in Europe, to say that. Exactly. But it does say under changes, we may make changes to these terms basically whenever we want to, from time to time, by notifying you of such changes by any reasonable means, presumably on the internet, since it's an internet service, including by posting a revised agreement on the applicable Spotify service. So a lot of ability to change the terms of these terms of use that we all just clicked through, which we're going to jump to. But what do you think about just the language in here and the power it gives them to do kind of whatever they want?
So that depends on who you are. If you're Spotify, this is great. If you are a streaming service or a software as a service group, SaaS for anybody who's more into the tech field and IP field, that kind of terminology is excellent to have in an agreement like this. Now, if you are an artist, that means that you don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And the only thing that you can really do, the only power you really have, is saying whether or not Spotify can use your catalog, right? And I can think of a few artists that have been successful. Taylor Swift is a really well-known example, not just with Spotify, but with other services. We saw the way that she reacted when Apple Play became Apple Music or Apple Play. I'm not an iPhone user, so I'm not entirely sure which term to use there. But we saw how much pressure she put on Apple during the process of that rollout, right? That completely changed the way that they structured their royalties. But most artists aren't Taylor Swift. They aren't Beyonce. They aren't the Rolling Stones. They aren't these long-term classic evergreens that are just going to be shelling out, plays and views. So if you're an indie artist, especially, and you don't have the backing of a record label to really push for you, which is a whole different set of circumstances that we're not really going to go into right now. If you don't have that kind of power, you really are at the mercy of Spotify here. And the best that you can do is work on public opinion. You can work on whether or not to put your catalog on there. I don't know of an indie artist that wouldn't want to put their catalog on Spotify, just because you need to be able to put it out there to promote it. But a lot of it is based on public opinion and how you can sway public opinion, what your viewership is, what your followership is. And Spotify is very great with their PR team. They are really good at doing outreach and changing small things in the app so that a non-artist user like myself, I'm not a musician, who wants to look at Spotify, opens up the app and they see these great things about Spotify because that's what they're going to do on their app, right? If you're not paying attention to music news or entertainment news, it may not run across your desk. You may not notice that these changes have come in, and you may not understand what about those changes is damaging or possibly threatening.
Yeah, speaking of changes, I like that you brought us this because you can see sort of both the contract drafting and kind of the PR thing at the same time, where they are giving contractually required notice, but trying to do it in a way that says, hey, sorry guys, but this is coming. So we're going to talk about a few specific issues that they're calling out for new policies that will be incorporated in the terms upcoming as they are able to do. We're going to start with artificial streaming. I'm going to ask you to define what artificial streaming means, but it's something they don't like, and they are saying they're going to address it by, beginning early next year, we will start charging labels and distributors per track when flagrant, which is a word, artificial streaming is detected on their content, and the new deterrent follows improved artificial streaming detection technology, right? So we've got this context of artificial intelligence blowing up. They're trying to address it. What is artificial streaming, and what do you think of this as a deterrent to that problem?
Yeah, so before I jump into that, I do want to add an additional point in here. It's kind of easy to miss on the article, but these policies actually went into effect on April 1st of this year. So this blog post was released last year, I believe in November. So it made waves back then, but it took time to be integrated in. Now, artificial streaming is something that the younger millennial generation and Zoomers and Gen Z, Gen Alpha are going to be very familiar with. For those of us who are not as social media oriented, this might be a better idea to look into what this means historically. So YouTube used to have a huge issue with this, and they have policies around this where you would use a tech bot to basically play a track or a video over and over and over again, and it would artificially inflate your numbers. And when your royalties are based off of your views, your listens, your plays, right? That is going to artificially boost the amount of money that you get back in your pocket. So what Spotify has come into is even more nuanced. The way that royalties work for Spotify is very different than what the public thinks of. I'm going to ask you a quick question here, Mike, and you may already know the answer, but do you think that your Spotify subscription, if you pay for a Spotify subscription, is only going to the music you listen to, or to the entirety of the music and data on Spotify? Do you think we make
That's a good
giant,
question.
do we make a giant pot, or do we pay for just what we listen to?
Yeah, I would assume just what I listen to, but some of the language in here is telling me there's a pot somewhere.
Absolutely not. That is not how Spotify works. In fact, there's only one or two streaming platforms that work that way. And I'm not going to go into that, which ones they are right now, because I don't want to misquote and I don't want to go in the wrong direction. But the way that traditionally Spotify has run their royalties, and you're going to see there's a slight difference added onto it with this policy change. But the way that Spotify has run their royalties is that they take every single play across the entire app, the entire site, and they toss it into a pot. And your proportion of plays is the proportion of the money you get out of that total pot. So what that means is, if you're somebody with an evergreen, I love Beyonce. I'm a killer, Beehive, stan. If you love Beyonce and you listen to a lot of Beyonce, and I love classic Beyonce, I'm back to early 2000s, let's go. Then Beyonce, who is a household name, who we know, who we love, who is always going to get a lot of plays, right? Additionally, she's putting out a lot of new music, right? Most artists are going, if they're not fully retired, are going to be constantly putting out new material, either because they want to enjoy the love of it, or they run into this problem I'm about to talk about. So the other problem with royalties on here is that catalog is always going to increase, right? New albums are always going to come out. New singles are going to drop. New podcasts even are going to get tossed into this mix, right? And as that increases, your evergreen songs that are always going to bring you a little bit of money, a little bit of playtime, right, are going to diminish in value, right? Because at that point, your evergreens are fighting against the new bop, the new hit. And we're always going to have new hits. That's just the nature of a creative industry. There's always going to be something new. So whenever you introduce artificial streaming to this, you are potentially not putting out anything new, but you are using a bit of a cheat code, kind of, to inflate the plays of what you've already put out. And that is going to take away from people who are actually garnering a viewership or a fandom, right? That are going to subscribe to what they enjoy, what they like to listen to. It's going to take away from those new items that are actually popular, instead of, an old white noise track, which I believe is going to be addressed here as well. So this idea of artificial streaming is actually pretty big, and this is a really great addition for artists. The question is, and we don't really get a lot of information on how they're going to do this, the question is how they're going to track that. They're saying that they're using AI to do it. They're not really giving us a lot of details. We don't know if There's going to be an ability to appeal if there is an issue here. So we just don't have enough information to tell us, is this going to be done in a way that actually works? Or are we going to run into issues of big hits that suddenly blow up being taken down at inopportune times because the AI that Spotify is using has misfired? So that is a potential issue here that does concern me.
Yeah, speaking of the white noise that you mentioned, one of the issues they identify is also gaming the system with noise. They point out that functional genres like white noise are popular. People will go and they'll listen to it for a long time, but there are issues with it, that some of them are really long. And they point out, starting next year, which has already happened, as he pointed out, we'll increase the minimum track length of functional noise recording to 2 minutes in order to be eligible to generate royalties. Functional genres include the ASMR and the machine noises. And over the coming months, we'll work with licensors to value noise streams at a fraction of the value of music streams because people are plugging it in and falling asleep. What do you think about this issue and how they're handling with this new policy?
Yeah, so again, this really matters depending on where you are in this situation, right? This is something that is going to hit artists and is going to hit producers of these white noise kind of functional noises. If you are a music artist and you are putting out things that are not meant to be background noise, you want your stuff to be valued more, if not at least the same as that white noise. Now, having a white noise track that lasts for 30 seconds or 10 seconds, some of you even last maybe 15 seconds in Spotify's catalog, and having that looped over and over is going to kind of do the same thing, really, as that artificial streaming, right? It's going to inflate and it's going to move that up. Now, I love background noises. I sleep to rain noises every night, right? I have a background kind of TV show that I put on when I'm studying because I've seen it so many times through every episode that it's just like white noise at this point, right? But if you're going to game the system in a way where you're just going to cut your track over and over again into these tiny amounts because you know people aren't paying attention to what that playlist is acting like, then that's an issue. That's definitely cheating out other people within the system. Now, this idea of valuing it as less than can be a little alarming for producers of these sounds, right? I know Spotify, unrelated to this, actually just announced that anything noted as nature was gonna be donated towards was going to at least give some of the royalties to nature conservation and stuff like that. I'm not sure who they really talked to negotiate that. I don't know if they came up with it on their own. I don't know if they worked with these groups. I haven't done that research, so I can't say yes or no. But the idea here that this is being valued as lower can be alarming to somebody who is building a streaming career off of ASMR, right? ASMR is a pretty big field, right? And it goes really well. We see these videos on YouTube getting hundreds of thousands of views. It is something that is meant to be played over and over, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's less valuable, right? The idea of saying, yeah, well, these rain noises, the storm in the background, doesn't really matter to me. I care more about the music. Well, it might be the reverse to somebody else, right? Good example, people with sensory overload issues, children with autism. I have several family members who are autistic that use that white noise to help them function. That's very valuable to them, right? So it's this idea of putting a marketplace value on something that's a little nebulous, and it's a bit harder to determine, well, if white noise is less valuable than music, is Spotify going to come in and say some genres of music are more valuable than each other, right? Are they going to start adding these stepping stones? That's something that I think everyone should be concerned about. Now, where you stand exactly on this spectrum of ideas, again, really does fall into which area of the industry you're producing in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, on the practical matter, I mean, you point out a lot of this is Spotify figuring out how do we fairly pay people and how do we fairly take our, I don't even know if they're profitable yet, but profit.
So
but they,
Spotify actually has never been profitable. What they do is they go back to shareholders. So they're a net zero company, typically speaking. But
well, but they do have an issue of collecting payments, and they point out in this issue of what they call payments lost in the system. And the short version is that if they're doing tiny microtransactions, sometimes those bank costs actually offset the transaction. So the only people getting money here is the banks, and they've got some policies here that they're trying to basically you're not going to get paid unless you have at least 1,000 streams to get the royalties. You know, they're very sweet about the way they talk about it, like we're doing this for you because we don't want to make the banks rich, but it might also impact users. What do you think about this language in this policy?
So this policy is the one I have the most beef with. I typically work for the musician, right? I'm getting married to an entertainer. Probably will be married by the time this airs. But I work with musicians. I have clients that are musicians. Just because you haven't reached a threshold of streams doesn't mean you get to throw those streams away. We see this with the MLC. Yeah, they may not be able to pay you out, but if they don't have enough to pay you out and pay for cutting that check, they'll just hold on to those and wait until next time, right? That's the way that the Mechanical Licensing Collective, or MLC, in the US works. We still admit that maybe we haven't gotten enough to make a payment functional, right? If you are not having enough streams to pay somebody out, that's okay. Hold on to that money. Hold on to that because that person still garnered you views. That person still brought traffic to your platform, right? And I'm going to get a little heated about this because this is an area that I think is completely ridiculous. This idea of, oh, you didn't get 1,000 streams. Well, what if you're an indie artist, you release a new track on the last day of the month, and maybe you release it later on in the day because you're going to have a launch party, right? But it's April 30th, theoretically. We're dropping a single at our launch party for that single at like 8 p.m. If you're an indie artist, you're not going to get 1,000 streams in one night. That's not going to make sense. And that could potentially even be flagged by their other policy for artificial streaming, right? They may say, hey, this is a lot of traffic all at once for somebody that never has any traffic. Why is this jumped up? And they may shut that down. These policies interacting together, it's very alarming to me because we're effectively saying, hey, yeah, you brought us some stuff. You got somebody to pay to use our service, but we don't care about that because you didn't have enough of that. So we're not going to pay you back.
I mean, that's the business model, right? Like basically the Spotify business model is the long tail drive. I understand that you've got the top of the tail. You know, you're going to have the Beyoncés and the Taylor Swifts, and they're going to drive most of the views. But the point is, millions of people who otherwise would not care to listen to the radio, they listen to Spotify because they're super fans of the super weirdo group, and that's where you got the majority of your traffic. So there's no way to really capture this. I want to get to kind of the business model and the idea that you're contract drafting in this way, that you're making these changes this way. If you're doing this in a way that Spotify's ethos, whether this is real or not, is we're here for the people. We're here to give the long tail. We're here to involve all of you. We're here to keep you informed. But they have contractual obligations that they're creating in those terms of use. What do you think of that balance of trying to get the contract terms right, trying to have a notification process and a change process that works, but also sticking with the ethos of the business? Do you think that this method of saying, here's the terms, we're just going to one-directional, tell you what we're going to change in the future, does this work? Do they have feedback process? How would you change this process in terms of contract solidifying?
So the contract itself is beautifully done because it's very flexible. If I was Spotify and I was writing this contract, whoever they hired to do this and use this use agreement, amazing. Very well drafted if you're Spotify, right? Because you need that flexibility to change as is required, because we know that we're going to be dealing with stuff going back and forth from different countries. We're going to be dealing with changing environments. It's part of what allows them to adapt to things like AI. What I would like to see added in, especially from an artist perspective, is a kind of like a review and comment section right? Where they actually go and they pull these artists, and that's baked into the system. And not just the artists, but they allow the users who aren't necessarily posting, but are definitely using Spotify to upvote or downvote a change. They're allowing people to leave openly available comments out within the realm of professionalism, right? We don't want we don't want hate speech. We don't want screaming. That's not necessarily productive. But something that almost mirrors the way that our regulatory system in the U.S. works, right? Having this comment period where we review these issues. That would give quite a bit of power to a lot of the artists. Now, I can see why Spotify would not want to do that from a business perspective, sure. Right? Sure. So if I were Spotify, I would want to keep things exactly the way they are, where I can change things, where I can control my own PR, where I don't have to necessarily allow people to comment in a public forum on my own app, right? But I also think that by leaving that out, Spotify is also leaving behind a chance to connect more to their consumers, right? You want to know what your consumers want, because otherwise you can't sell. Now, Spotify has a bit of a cushion.
I mean, to your point, to your earlier point, the head of the tail, the Taylor Swifts and the Beyoncés, like, they're the only people who have voice right now at Spotify. But Spotify's whole business pitch is, we're not the radio, right? Like, we're not. Yeah. We're going to allow the long tail. We're going to allow the little guy to go find. We're going to allow you weirdos who love They Might Be Giants, even though it's 2024. That's me, to go flood whenever they want to listen to it. So it seems to. I know it's logistically really difficult to collect the everyman, but that's literally your business. So it's an interesting problem, and I appreciate you bringing this.
Yeah, even if it's just like a polling situation of like 1 to 10, how much do you agree, right?
Yeah.
And that would help their marketing team quite a bit as well. That would be a great marketing tool. I would love to see something like that baked in.
Yeah, these systems where you're negotiating kind of documents that don't have equal input, right? Like, these are just click through, these are contracts of adhesion, but you do need that feedback. That was the purpose in your business. So I appreciate you bringing it. We're going to have these documents over at lawinsider.com/resources, so you can see these two changes, these changes in action. But for people who want to reach out to you, Amber, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so you can actually reach out to me at my firm. I work with Promise Legal in Austin, Texas. You can find us online. Just Googling Promise Legal ATX should bring up our website. We're in a little bit of rebranding right now, so you may see some changes to the visuals of our website as time goes on. But you can find me there. I'm always out and about in Austin, especially around the music scenes, because like I said, I'm pretty closely involved with a bunch of artists here. Always feel free to reach out to me that way. You can also send me emails to my work email at amber@promiseatx.com.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I'll have that information and these documents over at lawinsider.com/resources. And if you want to be a guest on the Contract Teardown Show, just email me. I'm at community@lawinsider.com. We'd love to have you. Thank you again, Amber. And to the rest of you, we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Contract Teardown Show from Law Insider. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show. We really appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.